Well, good morning, YouTube. Guys, today we're back up working on the 550. If you noticed, it's a little dark outside. It's about 9:30 in the morning. You can hear thunder rolling in the background. But we're mostly undercover. I mean, we're right at the edge. I don't know, maybe I got enough room. I might be able to push this truck back a little bit, get me a little bit further away. So hopefully we don't get wet. Spent yesterday adjusting the axle on the trailer there, which hopefully you guys have seen that video by now. I don't know. And actually, I stand corrected. I didn't really video any of the axle correction, but I did make a video about putting the wheels on the trailer. You'll figure it out when you see it. So while we were away at Laconia Bike Week for the 100th anniversary, Joe was able to get a set of reman injectors for this truck. And yesterday or the day before, I don't remember what day, one of these days I went out and I got new glow plugs for it, new valve cover gaskets. Remember, the wire harnesses go through the gaskets on this. And I also picked up a new starter for it. Now what we're gonna do is I did a bunch of research, and it looks like if you take the starter out of a 6.7 liter Powerstroke from 2011 or newer, and you change out the nose cone on it, it'll bolt right into this truck, and then you get the gear reduction rather than the direct drive, and it will spin the motor over a whole lot faster, because 7.3s were kind of known for being a little bit slow starting, especially when the starters get weak, and especially if your batteries are weak. But remember, we just put new batteries in this a couple of months ago. They should all still be good. So a couple different projects going on here, but we're going to get the injectors and the glow plugs installed first, then worry about the starter and the oil change part of it afterwards. Yeah, we're changing the oil because there's no way I'm going to run this old oil that I don't even know how long has been in here through this brand new set of injectors. Well, brand new set of reman injectors. So I'm going to grab my step stool and my tools and carry some stuff over there. And as you can see, I moved Goliath over this way just so that I have easier access to my tools, which is still going to suck when the rain starts, but it's better than walking all the way across the parking lot to the backside where Goliath is normally parked at. Hi guys, I've got my basic hand tools and all my parts laid out here to start the installation, but unfortunately the rain has definitely started. Now, the truck is primarily staying dry. See if I get back here, you can kind of see the rain line stops just before the nose of the truck, but the engine compartment's staying dry. Yeah, probably picked a bad day to come do this, but we've got to head out to South Dakota on Monday. It's Friday. I've only got a couple days, so I just got to get this stuff done. So in preparation for this job last night, what I did is I took all 8 of the brand new injectors and I put them in this kind of Tupperware bin and just poured oil over top of them so that oil can kind of get into all the oil galleries, kind of like you'd soak a lifter before installing it in a car or a truck or a motorcycle. Whether this is absolutely necessary or not, I don't know, but I figure it doesn't hurt. Not only that, but to make sure that everything is nice and lubed up as it goes in. And I feel like it kind of helps to prime the injector a little bit. May not be necessary, but either way, it definitely doesn't hurt anything. And I shouldn't have to explain what oil I'm using, only the best. 6 times more wear protection. So obviously you guys know I use Amsoil products, hence the name. But, you know, thing to note here too, one of the biggest problems with diesel fuel injectors is called stiction. And it happens a lot with these older style injectors that use the high pressure oil to fire them. And clean oil, believe it or not, will actually make your engine run better. A good quality oil will make it run a whole lot better. Better lubricity reduces the stiction possibilities. And Amsoil has been tested thoroughly, and they have been proven that by using the product, you almost eliminate the stiction problems with injectors without having to add any additives. I know that there's a lot of additive companies out there for stiction protection and relief or whatever. But guys, most people don't understand that when you add an additive to an oil, you have no idea what that total oil formula is, and it's a bad idea. Oil additives are gimmicks. It's not saying that they're not a good product, but if you're using the right oil, you should never add an additive. So ditch the additive, and it ends up being way more expensive too, guys, way more expensive to add additives than just to use the good oil. Just use the right stuff to start with, and don't screw up the formula. Hi guys, so when we last left off, we'd removed the injectors, put the valve covers back on, and kind of organized things a little bit. So Now we're gonna go ahead and pull the valve covers back off. We're gonna remove the glow plugs, and then we're gonna go back and reinstall the new glow plugs and the new injectors. All right, for those of you that are not familiar, this is what a 7.3 Powerstroke glow plug looks like. Basically, it's just a small rod heated element with a connection at the top, threads. The hex size is about 10 millimeter. So we're gonna go pull the old ones out and get the new ones in. And it's a pretty simple process, especially once the fuel injectors are out. When the injectors are in, sometimes they're a little tricky to get to. But without the injectors in, it's a straight shot to get to them. It's pretty easy. So if you look right there where the injector bore is, just to the top right, you'll see the tip of the glow plug sticking up right there. And if you look, there's a little bit of oil. Oop, flashlight battery's going dead. A little bit of oil in the pocket around each one. So we're gonna go ahead and blow that out a little bit just so that oil doesn't run in while we take them out. Yeah, normally I would have used an air compressor, but I don't have an air hose out here anywhere without having to go fire up Goliath and run a hose off of its compressor. So I figured the little battery powered blower probably did a better job because it didn't blow it at such a velocity that it sprayed it everywhere. It just kind of moved the puddle out of the hole. All right, so now it should just be as easy as getting your ratchet on there and knocking it loose. I guess I need to go change that battery, don't I? There you go, pretty simple. All right, so once they're broke loose, see if I can get my fat fingers in here to grab it and slide it out. And there we go. And I don't even know that these are bad, guys. It's just we're in here, so we're gonna do it. Sometimes you'll see the tips are really swelled up on them. This one looks pretty good. Well, guys, I'm just now getting started, and now the rain has picked up considerably, and so has the wind. So now we're getting the water blowing in and getting into the engine bay. Not fun. All right, guys, an installation of the new one is as easy as dropping it in the hole and then tightening it up. Pretty simple. All right, and now that all the glow plugs are in on the driver's side, we're gonna get ready to start installing the injectors. Now, in this little baggie, I have the oil deflectors, which we're reusing from the original set of injectors. And they just kind of bolt on. Quick, simple, easy, no big deal. So they've all been cleaned and ready to reinstall. So we're gonna start pulling the injectors out, and I'm gonna stand them up so the excess oil can kind of run off of them before we go and actually install them. And I'm really hoping we get enough time to do this. My daughter just sent me a message a few minutes ago saying that the storm is gonna get way worse and last until about 2 o'clock, so that I may want to consider taking a break, because if it starts blowing in again, it's gonna definitely hinder the installation. So I have this container here. It's an old nut container, and cleaned it out. So what I will do is just take the injector, and as I pull it out of here, I'll let the excess kind of run off of it, the big heavy stream. And then I'll just set it in this container for the moment. That keeps it upright and allows it to continually let that excess fall off of there, just so we don't put a bunch of oil down into the injector cups as we install it. And while the injector is sitting in our container here draining, I'm going to reinstall the deflector, but I'm just reinstalling them by hand for the moment, because you can't really torque them and hold the injector at the same time. So just going to get them all started so they're in place, and once the injectors are installed, I'll come back in and torque all of these down. All right, and now that I've got those injectors all prepped and ready, I'm taking one last look inside all of my injector bores. Make sure there's no trash, no debris, or anything of concern before we do the installation. And then we're also going to inspect each injector. You want to make sure that the copper crush ring is on the bottom, that all of your O-rings are properly in place. They all obviously have lubrication because we soaked them in oil, and then nothing looks torn or damaged. And we're going to put them in place. So I've removed all of the injector hold down bolts that I just kind of lightly put back in place just so we didn't lose them. So now I'm going to go set all the injectors in their bores. All right, guys, one little tech tip I want to show you here. Remember when we took the injectors out, I noted that you didn't have to take both of the injector hold down bolts out. You only had to take the one out, and then the bracket would be able to slide forward and be able to take it out. And that's because if you see in here, this hole on this side is shaped kind of like a keyway. So in theory, when you install this, you want to make sure that this bracket right here, you see it moves. You want to make sure it's pushed this way towards the center of the engine. That way, when you set the injector in, the bolt head, and this isn't the right bolt, just use an example, fits through the keyway. And then when you push the injector in, it has room to clear. If you've got it in the wrong spot, you'll never actually get the injector to seat because the injector will hit the top of the bolt. So push those towards the center of the valley, then put the injector in, and then you'll be able to get that rocked underneath and clipped underneath the head of the bolt. Now, I know this may seem a little bit like common sense, but what I've seen a lot of people do in the past is they don't have that lined up right, and then they're pushing on the injector with their hands and they can't get it to seat. There is some friction there. You've got those O-rings and they've got to pop into their places in the bore, and there's friction involved there. So it takes a little bit of force to actually get the injectors to seat. But if that bolt is hitting that hold down bracket, you can't get past that very easily. And then what people do is they pull out hammers and they start beating on the injector to get it in. And then what happens is this solenoid cap on here, all right, that's actually, you know, the solenoid actuator for the injector. It's basically plastic. Now this one's got a metal plate on top. A lot of them do not. So I think this might be a more updated, reinforced model or something. I'm not real sure on that. But in many cases, they're just plastic. If you hit them too hard, they'll break them. That doesn't mean you can't take a mallet and just lightly seat them. But guys, you don't want to get aggressive with this. And if that bracket's in the right place, you probably won't need to get very aggressive with it. It takes force, but not excessive force. Hey guys, so check it out. I've got them pushed in as far as I can by hand, but I can't quite get them to seat any further. So using a rubber hammer, right? And this has got a plastic end right here, and it's got a rubber end. I'm using the rubber end, and I am just lightly tapping, and see? It's dropping right in. No force. And if for some reason you had to use a lot more force, I would double hammer it. What I mean by that is I take this big mallet and I hold it there, and I'll take the small mallet and I'll hit the top of that hammer. That way it absorbs some of the force, the shock load going into that solenoid, but it'll still drive it down in, which I haven't had to do that on any of these yet. Just a light tap and they're seating nicely. So now all four of the injectors are seated. So we're gonna put our injector hold down bolts back in and torque them down to spec. And guys, I know it may seem like common sense, but I gotta say it because unfortunately a lot of people don't use common sense. But everything like these injector hold down bolts, even the bolts for the oil deflectors, all the stuff, everything is started by hand. You never put a fastener in a power tool and put it in. And because of that, I really like this tool. So this is from Mac Tools, not sponsored, guys. This is just one of the tools that I love to use. It is actually a 1/4" drive extension, but it's got the screwdriver handle on it. So when you want to start a bolt, you've got the good grip with your hand, but you're not using the force of a power tool or even the leverage of the ratchet handle on it. Now, because the little quick connect on here, this keeps it where it can't come apart, is a little bit thicker in clearance. I do use another extension on the end of here just to get me in there, but now the injector's way down here and I've got all this room to move my hand. After everything is fully seated by hand, but not tight, just fully seated, I know that there's no issue with thread crossing or anything, then I can go back and snug everything down. You'll see even when I put the deflectors on the injectors themselves, I used my long Allen socket, but I didn't put a ratchet on it. I just threaded it by hand. Taking your time and doing these steps rather than just trying to force something in saves you a lot of time and thread repairs in the future. All right, so all four of the injectors are torqued down, and I even went back and retorqued all of the oil deflectors that I had started earlier. Now I say torqued. In all honesty, guys, I did not pull out a torque wrench on this. There are some things in life, working on cars, motorcycles, that absolutely must be torqued to spec, and other things that as a technician you kind of get the feel for. And in this case, that's it. I know what they're supposed to feel like. Now, if this were a 6-liter Powerstroke, I would definitely use a torque wrench. Those injectors and their setup are so critical to torque that if you over torque them, you end up damaging the bolt. And if you under torque them, they will come loose and rise out of their bore. But they've got a single bolt forked type hold down, where this one, it just doesn't happen. These are pretty resilient when it comes to that aspect. So yeah, really good and snug. I mean, not over tightened, but just fully seated and good and snug. It's really all you need on this. All right, guys, so now we're moving on to installing the new valve cover gaskets. So all the wiring is there for the injectors and the glow plugs all at the same time. Now these are a Dorman product. It's not OEM 4. We went with what we got at our local Napa store, but they also came with new injector harness plugs that go into the main engine harness. I guess in many cases people have these damaged and need to replace them. I don't think that's our case. I see no reason that we need to replace these right now, but we'll hold on to them in case we need them in the future. All right, guys, so the gaskets are in place and all the wires are connected, and I got to be honest with you, that was probably the hardest part of the job. I think I spent more time trying to plug in the glow plug connectors than I did installing all 4 injectors, and that's just because it's in a really tight area. The concept is simple. It's just a push-on connector. The end of the glow plug has got kind of a ribbed contact like a spark plug would have, and the boot for the connector is just designed to mate it. You just push them on. But when you get big sausage fingers, it makes it really hard. So instead of hemostats, long-handled ones definitely made it easier, but it still wasn't easy. So I guess at this point we are ready to go ahead and put the valve cover back on and get it bolted down, and then we'll move to the other side and repeat the whole process. All right, the valve cover is back on, all the fasteners back in place, and they are all torqued down to exactly 26.7 elbow torques. All right, so now we're gonna move on to the passenger side of the vehicle, repeat the entire process, but I think we're gonna make this one go a little bit faster. All right, guys, so injectors are in, glow plugs are in, all the harnesses are plugged in, valve cover gasket, valve cover. Everything's put back into place and ready to rock and roll. So now it's really just a matter of plugging everything back in, hooking up the intake system, the recirculation piece on top of the other valve cover, and then we're gonna drain the oil and move to the starter project. All right, guys, so I crawled underneath the truck and I pulled the starter out. There you go, pretty easy to do. I didn't film much down there. But basically there are 2 electrical connections. You get the large battery cable, which is I think it's a 15 millimeter there, and then there's the control circuit, which is like an 8 millimeter. So we take off the 2 wires, pull those off of the terminals, and there are only 3 bolts that hold the starter on. 3 like this. There's 1 at the top that you can't really see, 2 at the bottom, pretty easy. I broke them all loose, and I took the top one out first because it's the harder one to get to. And then take the bottom ones out, and you got plenty of room to hold the starter where you get those out, and then just lower it down. Pretty simple. But now we're gonna pull out the new starter and we'll compare the differences. So here, the original starter, as filthy as it may be, is the direct drive unit. You see the motor is directly in line with the actual starter gear, and this will come out when it engages with the flywheel to start the vehicle. And then the new style starter is a gear reduction. You see you got the motor is not directly in line with the starter gear. There is a gear reduction that happens within this case. And guys, as I'm looking at this, I think I was slightly misled. So I did some research, I even watched a couple of videos on YouTube where it was possible to change out the nose cones and you get the gear reduction starter that fits the 7.3 engine. But I'm looking at this, and if you look here on this one, this is the 6.7 starter. You can clearly see that there's a seam here, and this nose cone can unbolt. The gear reduction is all in this part right here, and then you got the motor assembly. So the theory is you take this nose cone off and replace it with the one from the 7.3, and then it all bolts up. But the problem is the 7.3 has a completely different style nose cone, and there isn't the separation there. So I don't know if the whole thing bolts in from back here, which would make it longer. So now I'm really starting to question whether that's the right thing to do. Now, I guess there is another model of starter out there that people are just calling the Delco. Delphi? Yeah, Delco, I think. And it's a gear reduction style starter, but it is a direct bolt in. But what I've heard is it's a much bigger, heavier unit. There were some cases where people were reporting that it was actually cracking the ear off of the transmission or flange housing where it bolts to. So I didn't want to get into that either. And I thought this was just a quick, simple, replace the end cap and throw it in, and it's not looking like that. So I'm also looking at things like the solenoid in here. It's on that nose cone housing on this one, and on this one it is too, but we don't have the gear reduction. So if I move that over, we'd have to change the solenoid over as well. I don't know. I may run up to the parts store, get a better option. But on the bright side, the storm has passed, and it is now an absolutely beautiful day here in Western North Carolina. Well, guys, I have everything back together. The new starter is installed. The oil is changed. The only thing that I've not installed yet is the airbox lid and the new filter. And that's just in case we've got to use some gasoline again to get it started. And the reason I say that is after putting the starter on, while the oil was draining, I bumped the starter over, and it didn't turn over any faster. It still did not sound good at all trying to turn over. Now keep in mind, there was no power to the rest of the system. I just bumped the starter. I wasn't actually trying to start the vehicle. And it turned very slow, very inconsistent. I'm still thinking there's issues with these battery cables. And the one thing that makes me wonder is something I noticed today. Well, first you got to kind of understand the way things are wired. So you've got a battery here. The positive terminal here runs straight down to the starter. And then another lead comes off and goes over to the solenoid. The grounds to the engine block. Really, you should only need one battery in order to get that starter motor to turn. But for some reason, if that's all hooked up and the ground is off on this side, nothing works. Nothing. Which is weird because these batteries are wired in parallel. So wired together in parallel, they should provide more amperage, more power flow, but they should still work independently of one another. If one was disconnected, we saw 12 volts going to everything here because that power wire from that battery just comes over and meets with this power wire. So it is literally the same lead. The ground on that side, however, does ground to the chassis in a different place. This one over here also has the body ground. So in theory, it should work with only one battery, and it doesn't, which makes me, again, believe there's something wrong with the batteries. So I'll jump it over real quick so you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. And then I think what I'm going to do to test is I'm going to grab the jumper cables out of my truck, and I'm going to go straight from the starter, positive and ground, come back up here and try it again and see if the motor turns any faster. Well, that actually sounded a lot better than it did the last time, but that actually sounds like weak batteries. Now they've been sitting here for months again, so I guess we're gonna throw them on charge. So now I've got the battery charger hooked up, and it's only been hooked up about 30 seconds, so it hasn't had any real time to charge, but I've got it on the 200 amp jump start. Let's see if this does any better. That's way better. Way better. Now, right now, I don't have the ignition key turned on. I'm not trying to start it, but because we drained the high pressure oil system in the process of putting those injectors in, it's going to take a little bit of time for it to turn over and fill that pump reservoir with oil. So usually they're a little bit hard to start right after an injector change. Sorry guys, I had to stop recording there for a minute. So now the charger's been on it for a minute or two, 3 minutes, and it was turning over much better, as you just heard. So I think I'm going to try turning on the key, and let's just see what it does. It may still take a while, but let's find out. So much faster, so much better. Listen to that thing go. All right, we'll let the starter rest and then let it cool down for about 5 minutes or so. We'll try it again. Damn it, guys, I tried over and over again and it didn't start. And then the one time I didn't have the camera on, it spun and spun and spun, and then it fired. Don't worry, the smoke is normal because a little bit of oil did get inside those combustion chambers, and a little bit even ran down onto the exhaust manifolds during the change. But it's running. Let it warm up and see how it does. It sounds pretty good. Well, guys, it actually sounds like it's running pretty good. There's a slight little surge to it, which, you know, to be honest, mine does it a little bit too. A little bit of a stumble here and there, but keep in mind, it's still got to get all the air out of that system. I didn't realize how dirty my head was. Anyway, eventually it'll probably smooth out. I'm literally just gonna let it sit here and run for 10 or 15 minutes, monitor all the temperatures, make sure nothing starts leaking, and then maybe we'll try to get it out of here because we're kind of boxed in, take it for a drive and see how it does. Remember last time I opened up the whole system on my excursion, it took, even the first 3 or 4 times I started it, it was still a little bit hard to start until it fully purged everything out of the system. But this is running surprisingly good because we were worried it had a bad engine. The way it was missing on the startup and the way it just sounded like it had one with back compression, but it doesn't sound like that anymore. That starter motor turned over nice and fast and even, and it's running really smooth. So we are getting a little bit of a strange kind of inconsistent idle from it. It idled really smooth for a while and then started doing this on occasion, then it'll clear up, do it again. So it may just still be air in the system. I did shut the truck off for a moment while I was checking codes because there was a check engine light on, but I think it was just the old codes from before we fixed it. Cleared the codes, the light is still on, but it says no engine code, so it's reading from like the airbag system or something. But anyway, I shut the truck off, and when it restarted, it turned over nice and fast again, but it took a little while for it to start. Not a real long time, but longer than I'd like. And that was pretty typical of still having some air in the system, and sometimes you just gotta drive them to get it through. So we're moving some stuff behind it. I gotta get some stuff off the bed, and I think we're gonna take it, drive it around, see what it does. Hi guys, so I've driven it about 15 miles now and it's running nice and smooth. It took a little bit to get there. It smoked for a little bit, but now I don't see any smoke coming out of the exhaust. When we first got it started and I revved it a couple times, it actually had a puddle of oil come out of the exhaust, but it's all that residual that got in there from doing the injector change. That's gone, and right now it really seems like it's running good. It doesn't make a lot of power per se, but like I said, it's a 550, so it's got a completely different program in it than what my Excursion had. But I'm willing to bet that with that broad torque range, no, it doesn't feel like it gets up and goes, but I bet it'll pull just about anything. And of course, this is a 550. It rides like a truck. You feel every bump, and I think you might even feel a couple that aren't there. The bed rattles, the brakes feel good. I think the clutch needs some work. Not the clutch, I should say the clutch fluid, the clutch actuation system. The pedal is really high. You gotta really lift your leg to get on it, and you've got to push it all the way to the floor to get it to go into gear. And then the second you let up on it, somebody's getting it. But anyway, the second you let up on it, it starts to go. A little tricky getting used to the transmission. AC doesn't work. Heat works great. No cruise control. The emergency brake doesn't work either. So gotta make sure you're parking on level ground if you want to keep it running, or just shut it off and put it in gear. So I don't see any leaks. I think everything is good on it for right now. So the check engine light on it, so I'm going to shut it off, check the codes one more time, start it back up again, make sure everything starts up nice, and then maybe we'll let it sit overnight and see how it does tomorrow, because it's already after 8 o'clock. So I'm checking the codes again, and I've got a P1280, which is Integrated Control Panel Circuit Out of Range Low, so I really don't know what that means. Then a P0470, which is Exhaust Back Pressure Sensor Circuit Malfunction. So I'll definitely check to make sure that's plugged in. It's right on the front of the engine. And I know that with the 7.3 that if that sensor is bad, it'll actually detune or derate somewhat because it thinks there's too much back pressure. So that could actually affect its performance a little bit. Now, if I remember correctly, there's a pipe that sensor threads into, and that pipe kind of bends down and goes to the passenger side exhaust manifold. And if it gets clogged up with soot, it'll cause a lot of issues there as well. So maybe that just needs to be cleaned. It's a pretty common thing to have to do on these every once in a while. But other than that, any of the other codes I see are like airbag circuit, and we're just not getting into all that stuff. But all in all, might have just a couple more things to mess with tomorrow and might have it all good. Just for giggles, I'm going to redo the injector buzz test. I assume they're all going to sound really good, as they should, but let's see if it's quiet enough. Full 8. I don't know if you guys could hear that, but they all sounded really, really good. Well, guys, I'm happy. I'm calling this one a success. I'm going to go pick up my tools. Like I said, it's well after 8 o'clock. You see, it's kind of getting dark out. Not really, but kind of. I'm going to go home. Been here a lot longer today than I planned on. I was hoping this was like a half-day project, but between the rain slowing me down, having to go to the store with a starter, and I had a bunch of phone calls kind of going on in between too, where I took a few breaks here and there to handle some business. So yeah, I really got started on it about, 10:30, 11. So yeah, it's been a good 8-10 hours, and I still got to clean up some tools. So we're going to end this one here, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, we got it running. Until the next time we see you, keep those engines running.